Welcome back, macroeconomists. Basically, today what we're going to be doing is the ASAD model. We're going to look at a couple different examples, and then we'll talk about recessionary and inflationary periods. So we're going to get started. So the first thing you should do is start in long-run equilibrium. Long-run equilibrium is at the intersection of all three curves. We have our long-run aggregate supply curve, short-run aggregate supply curve, and our aggregate demand. Our price level can either be CPI or the GDP deflator. Now I'm going to give you a couple events, and you're going to see what happens because of this. So the first one, we'll do an increase in taxes. So we start off in long-run equilibrium, and then step 2 says that we should determine which way the curve moves and which curve. So if we see an increase in taxes, we're going to assume that this affects our aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is, so what I always tell my students, C plus I plus G plus NX. Now this is taxes for consumers. Now this is going to affect our aggregate demand. So this is what we're going to see happen. If we see an increase in taxes, people are going to be spending much less. Because they're spending much less, our aggregate demand curve is going to shift to the left. So now this is AD1, that's our AD0. So increase in taxes reduces consumption spending. Now we have this is our new short-run equilibrium. Now what we call this little gap, so when you're on your left-hand side of your long-run aggregate supply curve, we call this, or this gap specifically, this is our recessionary gap. So this is our recessionary gap. So basically, our long-run aggregate supply curve is our potential, and we're below our potential. We could be at our long run, but we're not. So we created this recessionary gap. Now, how do we fix this recessionary gap? There's a couple things you can do. You can either fix your short-run aggregate supply curve or fix your aggregate demand curve. So the way I would go about it would be you would want to increase any one of these. So you can increase government spending, increase investment, increase consumption, or increase net exports. So what I'm going to do is we're going to increase government spending. Now what this is going to do, it's going to shift our curve back to our long-run equilibrium. All right, so we're going to back up one step. Before we do increase in government spending and going back, we have this recessionary gap. So what do we notice about price levels from here to here? We compare these 2 points. We see price level has decreased. What do we notice about our output? Output has decreased. What do we notice about unemployment? Unemployment has increased. Again, inverse relationship between output and our unemployment. So if we produce less, that means less people are working, unemployment is higher. If we produce much more, that means more people are working, unemployment is much lower. All right, so if I were to fix it, we could do increase in government spending. Now, if we said we wanted to stimulate our aggregate supply, basically we could say something about energy prices. Let's say I decrease the prices of oil. If we decrease the price of oil, more firms are going to want to produce, meaning you could also get back to this point right here. Now we're back to our normal level of output, but price levels have decreased. So that will take some time to fix as well. So we're going to go over our next problem. All right, so this problem, we're going to say there's a decrease in labor prices. If there's a decrease in labor prices, we know this is going to affect our short-run aggregate supply curve. Now it's cheaper to hire workers on. We can produce much more. So because of this, we're going to see our short-run aggregate supply curve shift to the right. Now, this new point, this purple point, so we'll call this A, this is B. This is our new short-run equilibrium. Now, we notice that price levels decrease, and we notice that output increases. So those are two things you're going to need to know, and also unemployment. So in your head, just think of what's going to happen to unemployment. If we see an increase in real GDP, we know that unemployment is going to go down because more people are working, more people are hired, and so forth. Now, what we call this, when you're past our potential, so this is our new point, our long run, this is our potential, we're past our potential. So what we call this is our inflationary period. So when you're past your potential, it's the inflationary period. Now it's called many other things, but when you're past your potential, it's inflationary. When you're below your potential, it's recessionary. So in this case, you're in an inflationary period. How would you fix this? You can either stimulate aggregate demand, so if you know the shift factors to that, or you can stimulate your aggregate supply. So what I'm going to do is aggregate demand. If I, let's say, decrease, or not decrease, sorry. We go, if I decrease, sorry, it's going to be increase in taxes. If I increase taxes, this is going to basically get us back to long run equilibrium. Basically what's going to happen is our AD curve is going to shift and we'll be at point C. So again, we're back at equilibrium, but our price level does get impacted because of this. So again, we have a recessionary, we have our inflationary gaps, or period. You can call it period or gap, whatever's easier. But your goal is to always get back to long run equilibrium. All right, so now, again, starting long run equilibrium. Our event now is there's an increase in energy prices. Okay, so if there's an increase in energy prices, we know this affects our short run aggregate supply curve. Right, this marker's dying out. So it affects our short run aggregate supply curve. If we increase our energy prices, that means we're gonna produce less. So our short run aggregate supply curve is gonna shift to the left. So this is our new point. We'll call this point B. This was point A. Now we're gonna do some analysis. What happened to output? We see output decrease. So output decreases. What happens to price level? Price level increases. Now, what happened to unemployment? If output decreases, that means unemployment is increasing. Now, we created a recessionary gap. This gap right here, again, long run aggregate supply curve. This is our potential. We're behind our potential. We're on the left-hand side. This is a recessionary gap or a recessionary period. Now, if you think about this, you have a recessionary period. So just think of what happens in a recession. People have less money to spend. People aren't working, so forth. Output decreased, but price level is higher. Now, in your head, think if this is good or bad. The answer is this is extremely bad. Higher price levels during times of recession, meaning prices for everything is much higher and people don't have money to spend, which is really bad. Now, this event is called stagflation. Stagflation is when you have higher price levels or you see an increase in price levels in times of a recession. This is extremely bad. You do not want this at any point in time. So just think about it. If you're in a recession, you just got laid off. If everything costs much more money and you don't have money to spend, you can't consume products. So this is the worst case scenario. You never want to have stagflation. Now, if we wanted to fix this, if we want to get back to long run equilibrium, we could shift our aggregate demand curve or we could decrease our energy prices. There's different ways to go about this. So again, if there was a free response question, it would be up to you. If there are certain multiple choice questions, the key thing is to know the shift factors for short run aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Those are the main things that you want to focus on. All right, so those are all of the practice problems we're going to go over today. If we were to do long run aggregate supply curve, you should know that if we increase our long run potential, it's going to help us produce much more in the short run as well. It's going to have an impact, and we're going to have some practice problems. You have a worksheet that will highlight all of these. If you have questions, drop a comment. let me know via email or during our Zoom session. I'm more than happy to help. So thank you guys. I will see you guys again soon.